You know that subtle expression on people's faces as they visibly attempt to calculate your age in their minds. The years you've lived simply don't align with what they see. Your appearance completely contradicts your chronological age. Yet this experience goes far beyond merely looking youthful. It stems from something much more profound. It is a quality that leaves them feeling slightly thrown off balance. Only a tiny bit, but enough to notice. You have likely experienced times when someone's eyes open wide upon hearing your true age. Alternatively, they might not even ask you directly. Instead, they simply hold their gaze for a moment longer than necessary. You can tell they are actively recalibrating their entire perception of you on the spot. Then comes that brief, noticeable silence. It is almost as if their mind is undergoing a complete mental reset. Here is the true insight behind this dynamic. This phenomenon has nothing to do with personal vanity. It is not about conventional attractiveness or whatever superficial label they project onto you. Rather, it centers on the reality that you carry an essence that defies their expected timeline. A number of you have reached your 40s, yet others consistently mistake you for being in your early 20s. Others among you are in your 70s, yet people genuinely insist that you look barely 50. I have talked with individuals who lightheartedly joke about these situations. They describe how their children's friends do a double take when meeting them. They mention how strangers in supermarkets inquire about which university they attend. Yet beneath that humor, a subtle hint of wonder inevitably glimmers. It is a mix of perplexity, weariness, or perhaps a blend of the two. I believe it is both, because the reality of the situation goes deeper. This initial reaction is merely the surface. The true question is why your presence creates such a profound shock. What drives that reaction? I am leading toward an essential point here. Follow me closely on this. Certain individuals embody an undeniable aura. This presence is not something manufactured or forced. It exists naturally and effortlessly. It is as though their soul connects with yours before their conscious mind even processes it. This exact dynamic is unfolding right now. When I focus on your personal energy, I sense 3 distinct traits operating simultaneously that rarely coexist, yet harmoniously do. That unexpected combination is precisely what leaves people so bewildered. First, you possess a striking gentleness. You hold an emotional vulnerability that feels almost purely innocent. Mind you, this is not naivety. Your former partner was a toxic presence. What they kept concealed behind that smile, those late-night messages claiming they had never encountered anyone like you, and that vibrant energy, the dark truths they buried so deep you almost thought they were imaginary, are about to strike you with unexpected force. Frankly, the realization will leave you stunned. It will deeply shake you. This isn't because of dramatic flair or some cinematic plot twist, but because the truth was right there in plain sight all along, obscured only because they refused to acknowledge it. They intentionally kept you from seeing it. They required you to remain blind. They needed you bewildered and doubting your instincts until you completely stopped listening to your inner voice. Now that you've escaped, as the haze finally clears, you are beginning to recognize that this was far more than an ordinary breakup. This wasn't merely a case of growing apart or them dealing with personal struggles. No, absolutely not. This was an entirely different ordeal, something that felt fundamentally wrong deep inside, even if you couldn't put it into words. It was an experience that made you feel as though you were losing your sanity, while simultaneously losing your identity. And as for what they kept hidden, what they kept in the dark, was not just the infidelity, the deception, or the gaslighting. It was the reality that they were fully conscious of their actions, fully aware of the damage, and actively taking pleasure in it. Have you ever found yourself sitting alone, perhaps late at night, in the shower, or on your evening commute, when a sudden memory resurfaces, an offhanded remark they made, a specific glance, or a strange moment you previously brushed aside, suddenly becomes crystal clear. It feels exactly as if a light was switched on in a room where you had been blindly wandering for months. That sudden realization is the true shock. That is what they kept covered up, their underlying motives, the cold detachment masked by warm behavior, and the resentment hidden behind flattering words. They disguised their drive for control and manipulation behind gentle phrases like, "I only want what's best for you," and you accepted it at face value. Naturally, you beloved them because you are a good-natured person who stands by others, avoids assuming the worst, and extends the benefit of the doubt. You rationalized that they were simply stressed or going through a tough time, or you questioned whether you were just being overly sensitive. That exact tendency was precisely what they exploited. They counted on your innate kindness, your willingness to forgive, and your inclination to see the good in everyone, transforming those traits into tools against you. Consider what that dynamic looked like when everything began. At the start, they were utterly consumed by you. It wasn't simple interest or mere attraction. It was an intense fixation. They sought to learn everything about you and wanted to spend every moment together. They reflected your energy, your interests, and your core values back to you, assuring you that you were unique, exceptional, and unlike anyone they had ever known. You experienced that same connection. It was electric, overwhelming, and felt like fate. However, rapid intensity like that carries a hidden side. It doesn't always signal genuine passion. Frequently, it serves as a trap. It often comes from someone who has carefully analyzed you, identifying your desires, vulnerabilities, and the exact words you long to hear, all to construct the precise persona you find irresistible. Then, once you are completely invested, after opening your heart, your personal space, your financial resources, and your future aspirations to them, they begin to shift very subtly. The changes happen so gradually that they are almost imperceptible. A slight jab here, a minor critique there, or a subtle withdrawal of affection whenever you fail to comply with their wishes leads you to start adjusting your behavior. You begin shrinking your presence, apologizing for situations you didn't cause, and convincing yourself that if you just show a bit more patience, understanding, and affection, they will return to the wonderful person you initially fell for. Yet that original persona was never real. That truth is difficult to digest, but that individual was merely a facade, a piece of bait. What they kept concealed was the fact that they never actually loved you. They were in love with the benefits you provided, the way you elevated their self-image, your focused attention, your validation, your unique vitality, and the visible excitement on your face whenever they entered the room. They cherished having someone who would go to any lengths for them, but they held no real love for who you were as an individual. They never truly perceived you, understood you, or cared to learn who you were. While they mapped out your vulnerabilities and knew precisely which triggers to activate to provoke a response, they never connected with your core self, respected your emotions, or safeguarded your mental peace. That is the reality that will stun you, not because it is a new discovery, but because you are finally giving yourself permission to acknowledge it. You have quietly known this for a long time, but you resisted believing it because acceptance meant facing the painful truth that someone you cherished, trusted, implicitly, and gave your everything to was simply taking advantage of you. Accepting that reality is an incredibly painful and shattering experience. Reflect on all those moments you chose to overlook, the instances where they made you feel insignificant, mocked your ambitions, dismissed your feelings, or made you feel simultaneously overwhelming and inadequate. Remember the times they punished you with cold silence and forced you to plead for their time, focus, and affection. Those moments revealed the mask slipping away to expose the underlying truth. Every time you invented rationalizations for their behavior, defended them to your social circle, or convinced yourself it was merely a temporary rough patch, you were actively helping them maintain their charade. You were shielding their reputation and preserving their image while they were actively dismantling yours. You failed to see it at the time because your entire focus was placed on saving the relationship, being a devoted partner, and demonstrating your commitment. Meanwhile, their primary focus was asserting control over you, keeping you uncertain and diminished, and ensuring you lacked the confidence to walk away. This is where the situation becomes particularly profound. What they kept hidden extends beyond the confines of the relationship itself to what unfolds now that you have departed. Now that you have stepped away and the illusion has dissolved, clarity is returning, and the feeling can be almost overwhelming. It resembles viewing your own existence from an outside perspective for the very first time. You begin to recognize the vast amount of energy you expended, attempting to repair something that was fundamentally unfixable. The precious time you surrendered to someone incapable of changing, and how much of your essence you poured into a person who was never going to offer anything in return. Processing that realization brings deep pain, grief, frustration, and regret. But it also brings genuine liberation. Once you perceive the reality, you cannot unsee it, and once the truth is clear, you can no longer pretend otherwise. The real shock isn't merely what they inflicted upon you. It's what you are finally willing to admit to yourself. It's the turning point where you cease protecting them and begin shielding yourself. It marks the shift from asking why they acted that way to reflecting on why you tolerated it for as long as you did. That question isn't meant for self-blame or self-shame. That distinction is vital. It is about waking up and recognizing that you were the one who remained, held on to belief, and maintained hope. Those qualities do not represent weaknesses. They are fundamental strengths that prove your deep capacity for love and commitment, as well as your willingness to show up for another person. The issue was never your ability to care, but rather where you directed that care. You poured your devotion into a vacuum, into someone who treated your love as a resource to exploit, rather than a gift to treasure. That was the core truth they kept concealed from you. They never wanted you to realize that they viewed you merely as a supply for attention, financial support, social standing, comfort, or whatever temporary need they had. The moment you ceased being useful, began requesting mutual effort, or expressed needs of your own, they shifted the narrative to make you feel like the problem, labeling you as demanding, clingy, or excessive. Initially, you internalized those labels because you trusted their judgment and refused to believe they could engage in such deliberate manipulation. Yet that was precisely what they were doing, and deep down, you have always known it. So what specifically did they keep hidden? They concealed their underlying disdain, their lack of genuine respect for you, their envy toward your accomplishments, their quiet satisfaction in your struggles, their pleasure when you stumbled, and their relief whenever you stopped trying. They hid their total indifference behind a performance of care, actively undermining you while masquerading as your supporter. They suppressed your growth because your development threatened their influence over you. They resisted your happiness because your fulfillment meant you would no longer rely on them. When you embody a mirror, individuals tend to either put you on a pedestal or keep their distance. Neither extreme offers genuine, meaningful intimacy. However, a profound release exists here as well. Here is the liberating truth. This solitary feeling is not a penalty. It operates as a necessary protective filter. It ensures you avoid crowds